the currency will be undermined and manipulated.
Honourable Member, your time is now expired.
Interesting, Chairperson. Thank you very much, Chairperson. I must confess that on behalf of MK Party, we are not going to support this budget vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Shivambu.
No, thank you very much, House Chair. We, as the economic freedom fighters, want to state clearly here, without any fear of contradiction, that we are opposed to the coalition of the neo-colonial and neoliberal forces with the liberation movement in the name of the so-called government of national unity. We believe that the liberation movement and all the progressive forces should have risen above their subjective political conditions and build unity of forces whose umbilical cords are buried in the same yard and constitute a progressive government premised on the values and aspirations of the Freedom Charter, progressive internationalism, and a commitment to redress the imbalances of the past brought forth by colonialism and apartheid. We have not yet concluded, Chair, that the liberation movement has totally crossed the Rubicon into enemy territory. It is, however, on its way there, and when it is there, we will treat the liberation movement as an enemy force and not as a political opponent. There are voices in the liberation movement that can still be rescued on its way to enemy territory, where we're going to treat it as an enemy force. Now, the National Treasury has got a legislative obligation and constitutional obligation to coordinate South Africa's macroeconomic policies and accept the production of research papers. There is nowhere where National Treasury has got to coordinate and guide macro and microeconomic policy in a manner that is going to achieve not only the expectations of society as a whole, but its own medium-term strategic framework objectives and commitments. In their own MTSF commitments, there's commitment to strengthening of the municipal finance systems. But 173 of the 257 municipalities are in huge financial distrain, and their budgets have collapsed. They have got a commitment to reduce wasteful expenditure and fruitless expenditure, but all of that has collapsed. The National Treasury has got an obligation to promote localization and industrialization through its procurement power. But there is no localization or industrialization that is happening due to the buying power of National Treasury. There is no regulation that commits, that binds those who procure on behalf of the state to procure locally and locally produced goods and services. It has got an obligation to stabilize the debt to GDP ratio. South Africa currently expends more than 380 billion rands on debt service cost, which is the biggest expenditure item in the budget of the state. More than any other expenditure in education, in healthcare, in the security services. It's a dismal failure out of its own obligations. National Treasury has got an obligation to combat the use of tax havens as destinations of the wealth that is generated out of South Africa. Up to so far, after we had raised it, it's more than 10 years now. There's not yet a coherent and cogent policy position and legislation to combat the usage of the tax havens and illicit financial flows. In the 2024 budget, which was presented in February, the Director General of National Treasury makes a correct observation that over the past 15 years, economic growth in South Africa has averaged 0.8%, And this is far below than what is needed because the population growth is far higher than that, meaning that over the past 15 years, South Africa is getting poorer. He further says that over the same period, the government borrowing has ballooned to support the rising expenditure. And as a result, debt service costs are choking the economy and the public finances. And the budget vote, the vote which we are saying we should support here, does not radically and drastically depart from what has been in the past 5, 15, 20 years. So the DA and all of these neoliberal forces have joined to continue with what they've been doing, which has been a neoliberal agenda, which has not got to improve the lives of our people. And we see that the lives of our people are not changing because of high levels of unemployment. Of even the 16-odd million people who are employed, more than 50%, Minister, are not having a living wage. Like they are just the working poor. They just go to work so that they can just sustain themselves just to go to work and come back. They cannot afford any asset. They cannot do anything to improve their lives much more meaningfully. Over the 7th administration as the EFF, we're going to continue to provide superior alternatives in terms of legislation on illicit financial flows and tax avoidance, on the cancellation of student debt. We're going to introduce legislation on the discontinuation of private ownership of the Sovereign Reserve Bank. We're going to introduce legislation on insourcing of government workers. We're going to introduce a framework on how conditional grants must be optimally utilized to drive the developmental agenda. We're going to develop a clear perspective as to how do we utilize optimally our relationships with Brazil, with China, with India, with all the progressive forces, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and all the countries that have gone, whether have joined the BRICS Forum, to maximize South Africa's developmental prospects. There is huge potential that we can maximize and gain major and meaningful economic value out of our meaningful economic partnerships with the countries that we relate with. Let us continue to reject this nonsense of a government of national unity until we constitute a progressive government that is going to drive the agenda of our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honorable Adebe.
Honorable Chairperson, the Minister, the National Treasury is the heartbeat of each